Imagine a car so daring, so futuristic, that it looked more like a jet slicing through the sky than a machine meant for the road. A car named after a Hollywood starlet, designed in Italy, born from American ambition and powered by the dream of a turbine engine. This is the Chrysler Ghia Streamline X, better known as Gilda. A one-off prototype that wasn't built to be sold, but to shock the world and change the way we imagine cars forever. The story of the Gilda begins in a decade when the world was obsessed with the future. The 1950s were an era of jet airplanes, supersonic dreams, and atomic optimism. Airliners were flying faster than ever before, military jets were pushing the boundaries of speed, and rockets were beginning their climb toward space. In this cultural atmosphere, cars were no longer just machines to get from one place to another. They were symbols of progress, of imagination, and of what the future might hold. In the United States, fins were sprouting on Cadillacs and Buicks, chrome was multiplying, and cars were starting to look like rockets ready for takeoff. In Europe, meanwhile, coach builders like Ghia in Italy were pushing design into sleek, experimental territory. It was a world in which cars weren't just transportation, they were sculpture, they were identity, and they were dreams on wheels. At Chrysler, one man was determined to catch this wave of futurism and ride it further than anyone else, Virgil Exner. As the company's design chief, Exner was growing frustrated with Chrysler's reputation for conservative, boxy designs. He wanted drama. He wanted lines that leapt forward, shapes that hinted at speed even when the car was parked. He called his philosophy the forward look. It was bold, it was risky, and it needed a centerpiece, something so outrageous that it would shock the industry into paying attention. This is where Chrysler's partnership with Chrysler Ghia became essential. In the post-war years, Chrysler had used Ghia to build limited production show cars, blending American engineering with Italian craftsmanship. But in 1955, the project was different. It wasn't just about building a stylish car, it was about building a vision. At the heart of Ghia stood Giovanni Savonuzzi. He wasn't your typical stylist. He was an engineer by training, with deep roots in aeronautics. Savonuzzi had worked on aircraft projects during World War II and carried that experience into automotive design. To him, the lessons of flight, lift, drag, stability, streamline efficiency were not limited to airplanes. Cars, he believed, could and should use the same science. When Savonuzzi was given the task of shaping Chrysler's radical concept, he approached it like an aircraft engineer. He brought in scale models and took them to the wind tunnel at the Politecnico di Torino. That was practically unheard of in the mid-1950s. Most cars of the era were styled for looks alone, with aerodynamics an afterthought at best. But the Gilda would be different. It would be tested, refined, sculpted by invisible air. The wind tunnel sessions revealed what worked and what didn't. Savonuzzi shortened the nose, narrowed the greenhouse, extended the tail, and added vertical stabilizers. Fins not as decoration, but as aerodynamic control surfaces. The final shape was astonishing. A long teardrop body with sweeping curves, a cockpit shoved far forward like a fighter jet, and tail fins that seemed ready to slice through the sky. Even the details were shaped by this philosophy. The door handles were arrow-shaped, blending into the bodywork so they would not disturb airflow. The underside of the car featured a belly pan, a smooth surface to reduce turbulence below the chassis, a technique borrowed straight from aviation. In every inch of its form, the Gilda whispered speed, modernity, and science. But here comes the twist that shocks many enthusiasts today. When the Gilda was first unveiled in 1955, it had no engine. That's right, it was a rolling sculpture, built to be admired, not driven. Savonuzzi and Exner wanted to showcase the form first. The plan was always to pair it with a gas turbine, but for the debut, the mechanics didn't matter. What mattered was the statement. Chrysler and Ghia were unafraid to imagine a world far beyond piston engines and ordinary cars. So why build a car without an engine? Because this wasn't about selling units or competing with Chevrolet or Ford. This was about capturing imaginations. The target audience wasn't the average driver. It was the journalists, the tastemakers, the influencers of the 1950s automotive world. When the Gilda rolled into the Turin Auto Show, its job was to make headlines, to plant a seed in the public's mind. The future of cars could look like this. And it worked. The Gilda was unlike anything else on the show floor. Surrounded by practical sedans and sports cars, it looked like it had come from another planet. It didn't compete with Ferrari or Cadillac. It wasn't even in the same category. Instead, it existed in its own universe, a fusion of American ambition and Italian artistry, dressed in the flowing clothes of the jet age. The name itself added to the mystique. The car was christened Gilda, inspired by the 1946 film starring Rita Hayworth. Just as Hayworth's character was bold, glamorous, and unforgettable, the Chrysler Ghia Gilda was meant to seduce the eye and leave a lasting impression. It was an automotive with a personality, a star of the show, a vision of speed and elegance. In the end, the development of the Gilda was less about building a car and more about building a dream. It embodied everything the 1950s believed about the future. That technology would unlock unlimited possibilities, that science and style could merge into something extraordinary, and that imagination was the most powerful fuel of all.
This was the essence of Part 1, the vision and development of a car that was never meant to be practical, but was always meant to be unforgettable. When we move beyond the dream and look under the skin of the Gilda, we find one of the most fascinating contradictions in automotive history. A car that was both highly advanced in its design and strangely incomplete in its execution. The Streamline X was built first and foremost as a sculpture, but over time it was given mechanical life. And that life was unlike almost anything else of its era. Let's start with the basics of its construction. The chassis was made from square tube steel, a rigid and lightweight foundation that gave strength without unnecessary bulk. Unlike many American show cars of the 1950s, which were often mocked up on production frames, the Gilda's underpinnings were unique, hand-built to suit its radical body. Over that skeleton, Ghia shaped a body of aluminum, not steel, because weight saving and formability were crucial. Aluminum allowed them to create the dramatic curves, the long sweeping panels, and the razor-sharp fins that defined the Gilda silhouette. Beneath the car, Savonuzzi insisted on a full belly pan, a smooth sheet closing off the underbody. This wasn't just for aesthetics, it was pure aerodynamics. By sealing the underside, airflow stayed laminar, reducing drag and turbulence. That kind of thinking was decades ahead of its time. Today, every serious supercar has a sculpted underbody for the same reason. In 1955, it was unheard of.
The suspension was a hybrid of familiar and experimental. Up front, the Gilda carried an independent suspension with coil springs, giving precise handling and comfort. At the rear, it used a solid axle, more traditional but practical for packaging. Braking was unusual too. The main system was hydrostatic, using fluid pressure rather than a standard mechanical linkage, and backed up by a simple mechanical emergency brake. Once again, we see the theme, part practicality, part experimentation. Now, about the engine. When it was first unveiled in Turin in 1955, the Gilda had none. It was a rolling dream meant for display, not driving. But later restorations and engineering efforts gave it a power plant worthy of its futuristic image, an Air Research single-stage gas turbine. This wasn't a piston engine with spark plugs and pistons firing up and down. It was a jet engine adapted to turn wheels. The turbine spun at an astonishing 55,000 revolutions per minute. At full speed, it produced around 70 horsepower, not an enormous figure by conventional standards, but delivered with a smooth, continuous flow rather than pulses. The transmission was equally unusual, a hydrostatic fluid drive that allowed seamless forward and reverse without traditional gears. Imagine a car that didn't shift in steps, but instead glided like an aircraft adjusting thrust. Performance figures were more theoretical than tested. Some estimates claimed the Gilda could reach 160 miles per hour, thanks to its aerodynamic body and lightweight construction. Whether or not it ever achieved those speeds is doubtful, but the important point is this: the Gilda wasn't about raw numbers. It was about showing the possibilities of turbine propulsion in a passenger car. Inside, the story was different. The cabin was tiny, minimalist, almost cramped. The forward placement of the cockpit made the driver feel like sitting in the nose of a jet fighter, but comfort and practicality were clearly sacrificed. This was not a car you would drive across the country. It was a car you would marvel at for its audacity. So how did the world react when the Gilda debuted in 1955? The Turin Auto Show audience was stunned. Here was a car that looked like it had arrived from another dimension. The long fuselage-like body, the towering fins, the tiny greenhouse perched forward, it was a visual shock. People were drawn to it not because it promised to be useful, but because it looked like the future materialized in metal. The press covered it widely, noting both its radical styling and the whispers of turbine power. Some critics applauded its daring, others rolled their eyes at what seemed like fantasy. But no one ignored it. The Gilda did exactly what it was designed to do: generate conversation, ignite imagination, and make Chrysler and Ghia appear as pioneers. In the years after its debut, the Gilda traveled. It was displayed in the United States, even spending time in the Henry Ford Museum, before passing through prestigious collections like Harrah's and the Blackhawk Collection. Each stop reinforced its reputation as more than a car. It was a work of art, an artifact of the jet age. Perhaps the most lasting impact came not from its mechanics, but from its influence on Chrysler design. The forward-look cars of 1957, with their dramatic fins and futuristic stance, bear a clear resemblance to the Gilda's proportions. Though the prototype itself never reached production, its DNA spread through Chrysler's lineup, inspiring cars that millions of people would eventually own and drive. So if Part 1 told us the story of vision, Part 2 shows us the anatomy of that dream. A one-off machine with an aluminum skin, a belly pan borrowed from aircraft, a turbine spinning like a jet, and a presence that could stop a show in its tracks. The Gilda wasn't about practicality. It was about spectacle, technology, and daring to blur the line between car and airplane. And that's exactly why, even today, enthusiasts and historians still talk about it. Not as a car you could drive every day, but as a car that redefined what the automotive could be. If the first part of Gilda's story is about vision, and the second is about engineering, then the third is about legacy. How this extraordinary one-off concept lives on today, nearly 7 decades after its debut. Because while many show cars from the 1950s have been forgotten, the Gilda has become immortal. Let's start with its status among enthusiasts. The Chrysler Ghia Streamline X isn't just a car, it's a cultural artifact. To collectors, it represents the pinnacle of mid-century optimism, that unique combination of Italian artistry and American ambition. The fact that only one example exists makes it even more desirable. Unlike production classics where hundreds or thousands survive, there is no market for the Gilda. There is only the Gilda. Over the years, it has moved through some of the most prestigious collections in the world. It spent time in the Henry Ford Museum, was part of Bill Harrah's legendary collection, and later joined the Blackhawk Collection. Each of these institutions recognized it not just as a car, but as rolling sculpture, something to be preserved and admired rather than driven daily. Today, it can often be seen at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, where it continues to captivate new generations of enthusiasts. On the rare occasions it has appeared at auction, the estimates have been staggering. In 2009, it was valued between $1 and $1.3 million, a testament to its rarity and significance. Earlier, when it was still unrestored, it had been offered at much lower figures, even around $125,000 in the 1980s. That dramatic increase reflects not only inflation, but a deeper recognition of its historical importance. If it ever sells again, it will almost certainly command a price well into seven figures. For the average enthusiast, of course, owning the Gilda is impossible, but seeing it in person is enough to leave a lasting impression. Its dramatic fins, its low teardrop profile, its cockpit pushed so far forward, these details remain just as shocking today as they were in 1955. In fact, some might argue they look even more futuristic now because cars have grown more conservative over time. And here lies one of the great paradoxes of automotive history. The cars that age best are often not the ones designed for mass appeal, but the ones that dared to be outrageous. The Gilda belongs in that category. It's not remembered for practicality, or for sales, or for comfort. It's remembered because it embodied a dream with no compromises. Beyond its beauty and rarity, the Gilda also carries fascinating curiosities. For example, its very name. Why Gilda? The answer lies in Hollywood. The car was named after the 1946 film starring Rita Hayworth, whose character was glamorous, seductive, and unforgettable. Ghia wanted their concept to evoke the same aura, a showstopper that no one could ignore. And just as Rita Hayworth defined cinematic allure, the Chrysler Gilda defined the flamboyant confidence of the jet age. Another curiosity is its role as a bridge between concept and reality. When restored decades later, engineers finally installed a functioning air research gas turbine, allowing the car to live up to its original promise. That restoration revealed both the brilliance and the limitations of the concept. The turbine was smooth, but not particularly powerful. The hydrostatic drive was ingenious, but complex. In practice, the Gilda was better suited to museum halls than highways. Yet the very act of making it run proved something important. This wasn't just a fantasy in aluminum. It was a real machine that could move under its own power, however impractical. And then there's the question of classification. What kind of car is the Gilda? It's not a sports car, though it looks fast. It's not a luxury car, though it was hand-built by Italian craftsmen. It's not even a prototype for production, because Chrysler never intended to build more. Instead, it belongs to a rarefied category, the pure concept car, a vehicle whose purpose is not transportation, but inspiration. In that sense, it's closer to a piece of art than to a car you could buy. Collectors and historians often point out how much the Gilda influenced Chrysler's later designs. The famous forward-look cars of 1957, with their soaring tail fins and futuristic stance, owe a clear debt to Savonuzzi's masterpiece. Even if most buyers never heard of the Gilda, they bought cars shaped by its DNA. In that way, the one-off showpiece touched millions of lives indirectly. So what lessons does the Gilda leave us today? First, that innovation requires risk. Chrysler and Ghia could have played it safe, but instead they built something outrageous. Second, that a car can be more than a car. It can be a cultural statement, a symbol of its time, and even a prophecy of the future. And third, that imagination has value, sometimes more than practicality. The Gilda didn't need to be mass-produced to matter. It mattered because it dared to exist. Nearly 70 years later, the Gilda still does what it was designed to do. It makes us stop, stare, and dream. Its aluminum skin may have been shaped in 1955, but its spirit belongs to tomorrow. And that is why it remains one of the most significant concept cars ever built, not just in Chrysler's history, but in the entire history of the automobile. A car like the Gilda reminds us that the most powerful machines are often the ones built not to transport us, but to inspire us. And if a single concept from 1955 can still capture our imagination today, just imagine what other treasures are waiting to be uncovered. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss the next deep dive into the legends of automotive history. Don't forget to like this video and share it with other car enthusiasts who love stories that blend engineering, art, and pure imagination. And now it's your turn. What do you think about the Chrysler Ghia Gilda? Was it a masterpiece ahead of its time or an impossible dream? Leave your thoughts down below and tell me which classic car you'd like to see explored in our next video. Your idea might just be the star of the channel's next episode. Because here, every car has a story, and the best ones are yet to come.